Welcome to the digestive system notes. We are going to go pretty quickly through the notes. This is not going to be a reading of all the slides since you all are capable of reading. This is going to be more of an outline of kind of the order, structure of the notes, where things are found, main points. I'll refer you to some animations, and probably most importantly, what to know or not know for the test, which is probably everyone's main concern. So we're in chapter 15, as many of you have already found out because of completion of worksheets. So here are the three functions of the digestive system that would make for an excellent multiple choice test. Here's the alimentary canal, which is of course the one-way tube from mouth all the way through to anus, and all the parts in between. Again, knowing those things in order will make a good multiple choice question for the test. Here are the other structures that are involved that we've kind of already been hinting towards and talking about quite a bit throughout some worksheets and other things that will be important to know their functions, but also their locations. Obviously, the digestion starts at the mouth, breaking down food particles. There you have special treat for watching the video, my mouth. You can see the kind of separation here between hard palate in front and soft palate in the back, including the uvula, but there's also, for digestion, it includes the lips and cheeks, which are helping to move the food around, tongue, obviously, aid in swallowing. And then, again, the soft palate, which is going to close, so food does not back up into the nasal pharynx, which we'll see a picture of that in a second, and of course the teeth. You'll notice I have a tooth missing here that was pulled, by the way, and a wisdom tooth pulled because there's a cavity on it between it and this first tooth that you can see. I also, here's another Marchand anatomy quiz for you. I have a little bit of a kind of a bulge here in my lip that you probably never notice on my right side. It's because I was bit by a dog once, and the dog's tooth went clear through my lip. It was pretty awesome. I had a hole in my lip. Some other mouth structures, these are all the salivary glands. Here's an easy way to remember them. From top to bottom, is that they are secreting more mucousy fluid as you go down, from parotid, submandibular to sublinguinal. Some additional information that we hopefully already have written down on the very first worksheet that you guys did with the whiteboard activity. Amylase, which is an enzyme that is aiding in starch digestion, that is in saliva, and important because starch is a huge carbohydrate. It's important to get that digestion started right away. It's going to be used for energy. Here's some more teeth structure stuff. I'm not going to make too big of a deal about this, but you should kind of know in general what these things are, and more of an outside-in kind of anatomy. Don't worry too much about a picture, and don't worry too much about all the details, but in case you're interested, here's this pulp that's on the inside here of the tooth, both the crown and the root. If you get a root canal, this is what's actually being done. They're taking out this tissue and replacing it with like a, I think it's like a rubber, kind of like a rubbery substance, which kind of desensitizes the tooth a little bit, but if you have an infection or some other kind of problem, that's how they solve it. They drill a hole here through the crown, they remove all this tissue and fill it up with some kind of like a rubbery liquid that solidifies. This was first done actually in like 1700, 1756. They used gold, so grills have been around a lot longer than the 21st century. Here's a cross section of kind of nose and throat, mouth and throat area to get the three parts of the pharynx. Nasopharynx, which of course is leading up to the nasal cavity. Oropharynx, which is the part where your mouth is located. Here's the soft palate and uvula. Here's the tongue, taking up most of the space here. Here's the epiglottis, which if you watched the video of my endoscopy video that I made for you, you saw a good shot of the epiglottis on the way out. Down here is the esophagus, narrow tube right here, and here, which we'll get to in the respiratory system, there's a trachea. You can see a little bit wider, more open. The epiglottis is covering that trachea from having food go down the wrong liquid or whatever, go down the wrong pipe. There's another view of these guys. Kind of get the idea. Here's 3 stages of a swallowing mechanism. Excellent test question. Going on to the esophagus. Starting with the first sphincter is the upper esophageal sphincter, ending with the lower, or also known as the cardiac sphincter, which is going to allow things into the stomach. Here's the stomach, which is going to do a little bit of absorption, but mostly chemical digestion. I will expect you to know some stomach anatomy, and so I will refer you to this video here, which is on the APR animations page, right here on the left side of your haiku page, and you'll see that will take you through some animations that I've recorded for you. The second one is stomach anatomy. Go through that. It's only a couple minutes long. Just give you an idea of what the parts are. Yeah, it gives you a picture of what you have, and then picture you have in the book already, but I think it's better to see it a couple different ways. This goes more into the gastric glands, and you'll have some of that on worksheet and also another animation, which you don't have this picture, but this goes, basically this picture is animated for you on that same page, but the next one down. Video number 3 on the APR animations, the mucosa of stomach APR animation. And also you have on the main digestive system page, you also have gastric secretion, which is something that pretty important part of the stomach. So going through this, I'm not going to expect you to know all this anatomy. You should know some of the basics that we'll get to in the notes, such as these guys and what they are doing. Mucus cells, which are goblet shaped, which is kind of like an old-fashioned chalice looking cup. Parietal cells, chief cells. Chief cells are releasing pepsinogen, which in contact with HCl becomes pepsin, which digests, as we'll see in a little bit, which digests proteins. Here's other stomach secretion stuff, and again I would refer you to, on the digestive page, the gastric secretions animations, which looks, this is a shot from that animation. So take a look at that to get the basic understanding. Don't worry about too much of the details. And continuing down to the rest of the, leading towards the bottom of the stomach, as the small intestine fills, here's an enzyme protein that gets secreted called cholecystokinin, which is secreted back into the stomach so that it slows down movement of food into the small intestine, so that basically the small intestine can do its job, which we'll get to. Here's some other parts of the stomach stuff. For the stomach, it's talking about this chyme that many of you have already heard in the whiteboard presentations. It's a mixture of food and gastric juice, which makes its way down to the pyloric part of the stomach, the lower portion, and then is going to leave out the pyloric sphincter to the small intestine. Before we get to the small intestine, we have actually an endocrine gland that's located kind of behind the stomach. So that's the pancreas. You've gotten already a lot of these details too in the whiteboard presentations. Here is the stomach and pancreas, kind of detached and not in the right spot, but gives you a better look at it, what it looks like realistically. Here's a table that I would expect you to kind of the basics of which macromolecule, carbohydrates obviously here at the top, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins, and an idea of which enzymes are digesting those things. So you should have that figured out. There's a typo on your notes, it's peptidase. Moving on to some other pancreas stuff. If you ever see entero, At the beginning of basically any science word, it's referring to something that has to do with the small intestine, the gut. A lot of time you'll see this beginning of bacteria that are found in the small intestine. So it's an enzyme that is going to be taken up by the small intestine, and it's going to activate digesting enzymes that are released in the pancreas. Oops. Here's a relationship that I would expect you to understand, the difference between glucagon and insulin. I'll show you another slide in a second here that will kind of sum that up. They're both coming from these areas called islets of Langerhans, named after the scientists that discovered them. This is a zoomed in portion of the pancreas made of acinar cells. This is an acinus, or a sinus. And you would see multiple acini all over the place, making up, basically besides some of the ducts, making up most of the pancreas. And so again, here's that relationship between glucagon and insulin. Anyone that knows anything about diabetes or has a diabetic person in the family knows a little bit about this already. It has to do with the regulation of blood glucose. And so glucagon is a hormone that is going to increase blood sugar levels if it's released. Insulin is going to decrease blood sugar levels. And here's that diagram as I mentioned. I wouldn't exactly expect you to memorize this, but it kind of gives you a sort of figure eight configuration of homeostasis of blood glucose involving glucagon and insulin on top, glucagon on the bottom, and going through the cycle here. That again, nothing that I would expect you to memorize, but maybe if you're doing diabetes or insulin or pancreas for your research project, this would be a good resource for you. Moving on to the liver, which again is part of the secretion into the digestive system, made of a bunch of lobes. We'll actually take a look at those lobes in a little more detail when we get to the dissection towards the end of the semester. Here are the basic functions of the liver. Pretty simple. I would also refer you to another animation, a video actually, of an animation that I recorded for you from that same reference that I have. So I would suggest that you go through that. It's going to give you a little more detail than you need to know for the liver, but in just a few minutes, better to get a little bit more detail than not enough. Go back to the notes. Here we have bile, which you have already seen or heard in those whiteboard presentations, released by the gallbladder and stored and released by the gallbladder, which is located on the underside of the liver, which is looking at the back of the liver here, where you can see all those lobes. And we'll get to those details when we get to the dissection. There's the gallbladder. Here you can see very green color because of all the dark green fluid that is located inside of it. So moving on to the gallbladder, its job is to basically regulate bile, which is pretty nasty stuff. It's helping to digest fats. There's some pretty gross pictures that I'm not going to expect you to know much about them, but these are the gallstones that people get removed. This is obviously some extreme examples. And we're going to end there and pick up in the next video with the small intestine.